This summer, I decided to visit Savannah, Georgia, a city known for its rich history and beautiful, eerie buildings. One hotel caught my eye, famous for its Gothic architecture and old-world charm. It was a humid evening when I checked in, the kind where you can feel the air stick to your skin. I was excited to review this place, but I was also a bit on edge. Something about the towering dark windows and the creaky floorboards added a real creepy vibe to the whole scene. As I walked into the lobby, I was surrounded by antique furniture that looked like it came straight from a different century. The dim lighting and the soft murmur of the other guests chatting added to the mysterious atmosphere. I got my room key from the front desk, a heavy brass piece that felt cool in my hand, and headed to my room, ready to dive into another adventure. Little did I know, this stay was going to be more of an adventure than I had ever expected. After dropping my bags off and taking a quick glance around, I decided to freshen up a bit. That's when I noticed something odd about the bathroom. Among the old-fashioned tiles and a clawfoot tub, the faucet stood out. It was way too modern and didn't fit with the rest of the decor. What's more, it had a persistent drip, no matter how hard I tried to twist it shut. It was just a small thing, but in the quiet of the room, each drop echoed a bit louder than it should have. I sat down to work on my laptop, typing up some initial thoughts for my blog. But it was hard to focus. The walls seemed almost too thin, carrying sounds from the neighboring rooms. I could hear muffled conversations, nothing clear enough to make out entirely, but I caught a serious tone in one voice, something about keeping it quiet. It made me pause, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was someone arguing? Or was it something else? The room was growing dim as the sun set, and I was about to get up and turn on a lamp when there was a knock at the door. Startled, I walked over and opened it to find a man in a hotel uniform. But unlike the neatly dressed staff at the front desk, his clothes looked worn, his shirt untucked. He told me there were reports of a leak in some of the bathrooms, and he needed to check mine. I hesitated for a moment. Something about him didn't seem quite right. But the thought of that dripping faucet nudged me to step aside and let him in, wondering if maybe this was just part of the hotel's quirky charm. As soon as the man stepped into the bathroom, he spun around and snapped the door lock shut with a quick flick of his wrist. Before I could even process what was happening, he pulled out a knife. "Your valuables now," he demanded, his voice low and menacing. I was stunned, frozen in place by the sudden threat, as I realized this was no maintenance check. Without giving me a chance to react, he grabbed a roll of duct tape from his pocket and pressed a piece over my mouth, muffling my attempts to scream. He then forced my hands behind my back, tying them tightly around the cold, hard pipe under the sink. The more I struggled, the tighter the bindings felt, digging into my wrists and anchoring me in place. I felt a sense of panic when I realized I had no way of calling for help or trying to escape. The terror escalated when I heard him leave the room. Through the thin walls, the sound of him forcing his way into the next room was chillingly clear. There were muffled shouts, a brief scuffle, and then a haunting silence that made my stomach turn. I strained to hear more, hoping for signs that the other guests were okay, but there was nothing. Just the heavy, suffocating silence of uncertainty. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted in the hallway. A voice yelled, "Hey!" and I could hear a scuffle outside. Peeking through the slight gap under the door, I saw shadows moving rapidly. The man burst out of the neighboring room, shoving someone to the floor with such force that I heard the thud from my bathroom prison. He didn't hesitate, sprinting down the hallway with a stolen bag slung over his shoulder, jumping over the railing and disappearing from sight. Locked in the bathroom, tied up and helpless, I felt a mix of fear for my own safety and concern for the injured bystander and the other guests. The hotel that had seemed so charming at first now felt like a trap, one that had closed tightly around me and others, ensnaring us in a nightmare scenario I had never imagined facing. Trapped and terrified, I knew I had to do something. Even though my hands were tied and I couldn't speak, I wasn't going to give up. With all the strength I could muster, I started kicking at the bathroom door. I kicked the towels, the trash can, and anything else within reach, making as much noise as I possibly could. Each loud bang echoed through the bathroom, and I hoped it would catch someone's attention. After what felt like an eternity, I finally heard footsteps hurrying down the hallway. Voices grew louder, and then the sound of the hotel security trying the door handle. "Hello? Is someone in there?" a voice called out. I tried to respond, but the duct tape muffled my cries. Realizing I was locked in, the security guards didn't hesitate. They forced the door open with a strong push, and light flooded the small bathroom. They found me there, bound to the sink, and quickly untied my hands and removed the tape from my mouth. I took deep breaths, the fresh air feeling like a miracle after the stifling fear. The hotel staff was incredibly apologetic and worried. They immediately called the police, who arrived quickly to investigate. Unfortunately, the robber had already escaped from the hotel, disappearing into the night with whatever he had stolen. The police took my statement and promised they would do everything they could to catch him. Meanwhile, the hotel assured me and the other guests that they would review their security measures to ensure this never happened again. Sitting in the lobby, wrapped in a blanket and sipping a cup of hot tea provided by the hotel, I felt a mix of relief and shock. I was safe, but the reality of what had happened was just beginning to sink in. After everything that happened, I sat down to write about it on my blog. I felt shaken but thankful to be unharmed. It was important for me to share this scary experience, not just to warn others, but also to help myself heal from the trauma. Writing it all down made me realize just how much this ordeal had changed the way I view traveling alone. In my blog post, I urged everyone to be more cautious and to always question when things don't seem right, especially in places where you're supposed to feel safe, like hotels. I emphasized the need for better security measures to prevent anything like this from happening to someone else. As I hit publish on my blog, I hoped that my story would make others more aware and careful, ensuring their travels remain safe and enjoyable. It was a long day on the road, the kind that stretches out like the endless highway ahead of us. Sarah and I were traveling across the country to visit family on the West Coast. As the sun set, we found ourselves pulling into a small, picturesque town. It seemed like a good place to rest for the night. We chose an old hotel near a small lake, known for its quiet charm. The hotel stood there, looking like it had seen better days but still holding on to its elegance. It was inviting, with its antique decorations and dimly lit hallways that whispered of times long gone. As we checked in, the air felt cooler, and there was a slight mustiness that clung to the faded wallpaper. The place had a certain eeriness, the kind that makes the back of your neck tingle, especially when the wind howled softly outside like a low murmur. Little did we know, our night there would turn out to be more restless than we could have ever imagined. After settling into our room, we noticed right away how quiet the hotel was, almost too quiet. The stillness was unsettling. We had asked for a room with a view of the lake when we checked in, but the receptionist told us it wasn't available. She hesitated before saying that a man had passed away there a few nights ago, and the room was closed off until further notice. That bit of news sent a chill through me, but we were too tired to think much about it then. Later that night, as we tried to sleep, I started to notice a strange smell. It was faint at first, like something burning very far away. Sarah said she couldn't smell anything, but the odor grew stronger, and soon she felt it too, a sharp metallic scent that seemed to seep through the cracks around the door. Then, by the early morning as we were still trying to sleep, the headaches began. Mine was just a dull ache at the base of my skull at first, but Sarah's was worse. She clutched her head and curled up on the bed, wincing with every throb. I got up to get her some water from the bathroom, and that's when the room started to spin around me. The dizziness hit me hard, and I had to grab onto the wall to keep from falling. As Sarah's and my condition worsened, a memory flashed through my mind. A news story from a couple of years ago about a family who had succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning at a rental property, a few neighborhoods away from where we live on the East Coast. I felt suddenly panicked as I pieced together our symptoms with the grim possibility. I tried to stand, my legs shaky and weak under the weight of my growing dizziness. I stumbled towards the room phone, intent on calling the front desk for help. My hands trembled as I picked up the receiver, only to find dead silence on the other end. The line was completely dead. Realizing we couldn't wait for help, I mustered what strength I had left to drag myself to the room door. Sarah was nearly unconscious now, barely whispering my name. With great effort, I managed to open it. The night air, chillingly cold, rushed into the room. It was harsh and biting, but it was fresh, a stark contrast to the tainted atmosphere inside. I gulped it down, hoping it wasn't too late for us. Feeling my consciousness slipping, I knew we had to get out. I wrapped my arm around Sarah, dragging us both towards the door. Each step was a battle against the weight of my own body. Just as we neared the door, my vision blurred, and I collapsed and fell to the floor. Fading in and out of consciousness, the door swung open wider, and a woman rushed in. She knelt beside us, quickly assessing the situation. "I'm a nurse," she announced, her voice calm and authoritative. She must have been staying in the hotel too. Recognizing the signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, she acted fast. She grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and explained our symptoms to the emergency operator. The nurse didn't waste any time. With the help of some of the other guests who started to gather after she had called for help, she dragged us out of the room, propping us up to make sure we breathed in as much fresh air as possible. "Stay with me," she kept saying, her voice a steady beacon as she checked our pulses and talked to us, keeping us engaged and conscious. Soon, the sound of sirens approached, and paramedics came running to our aid. They quickly gave us oxygen masks, which helped clear the dizziness and nausea almost immediately. Meanwhile, the nurse explained to the hotel staff what she suspected. The hotel manager, pale-faced and anxious, ordered an immediate evacuation of the building. Later, we learned that the source of the carbon monoxide was a faulty boiler located just below our room, and a blocked exhaust vent had made things worse. It was a frightening oversight that could have cost more lives, but thanks to the quick actions of the nurse and the emergency services, everyone was safe. As we sat in the back of the ambulance, wrapped in warm blankets and breathing deeply, relief washed over us. We were safe now, the danger past, all thanks to the alertness and quick thinking of a fellow guest. After a short stay in the local hospital, Sarah and I were back on our feet, feeling lucky to be alive. We were deeply shaken by the experience, more so when we learned that the same hidden danger that almost took our lives had claimed another just days before. It turned out the previous guest's death in that room with the lake view was also due to carbon monoxide poisoning. The hotel hadn't done enough to find the cause or fix it. As we drove away from the town, Sarah and I talked a lot about how narrowly we had escaped. We decided we couldn't just move on without doing something. We started advocating for stricter safety measures in hotels and began sharing our story online. We wanted everyone to know how dangerous carbon monoxide can be, especially in places you'd least expect, like a quaint hotel room. Our ordeal made us more cautious and proactive, always checking our surroundings wherever we stayed. We never wanted to face such a threat again, and we hoped our efforts could prevent others from experiencing a similar scare. It was one of those overcast days when the sky seems unsure if it wants to rain or clear up, casting a gloomy shadow over everything. I was driving down a long, winding road that cut through the heart of dense woods, the kind of place where each tree seemed to have its own ancient story. I was headed for a small, remote motel on the outskirts of a tiny town, far from the usual hustle and bustle. My name is Emily, and I write crime novels for a living. The solitude of such places helps me think, and the silence is my ally when weaving the complex plots of my stories. This particular motel was quaint, barely more than a handful of rooms and rarely fully booked. It seemed like the perfect retreat to finish my latest manuscript, a story about a detective on the trail of a clever and elusive villain. As I checked in, the quietness of the motel struck me immediately. Just a few cars parked outside, suggesting other guests were few and far between. The owner, a friendly enough man with a gentle smile, handed me the keys to my room, mentioning offhandedly that I'd probably find the place to be just what I needed for a good week of uninterrupted writing. Little did I know, my stay at this seemingly peaceful motel would turn out to be anything but quiet. As I settled into my room, the trees outside swayed as if whispering warnings, and the walls, thin as paper, seemed to absorb sounds in a way that made the silence even more pronounced. It was the perfect setting for a crime novel, and soon it would become the scene of my own eerie story. The first couple of days passed quietly enough as I immersed myself in my writing, but I definitely felt there was something off about the isolation of the place. The first sign that caught my attention was at the motel's diner. Every time I sat down for a meal, I noticed a solitary figure in the corner. It was hard to make out details, but each time I left, the figure would stand and leave just after me. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as it continued to happen, it felt more like a pattern, a deliberate shadowing of my movements. I started feeling more uneasy one night when the quiet was disrupted by the sound of footsteps outside my door. It was late, well past midnight, and no one should have been wandering around. Curious and a bit alarmed, I tiptoed to the window and peered out. I caught a glimpse of a shadow darting away, disappearing into the darkness that clung to the edges of the motel. The next morning, I mentioned it to the motel owner. He shrugged it off, suggesting it was probably just another guest who got the time mixed up. His casual dismissal did little to ease my growing apprehension. Then, the notes started appearing. The first one was slipped under my door while I was deep in a particularly challenging chapter. It read, "Nice story." Simple, harmless on the surface, but the fact that I had no idea who it was from made my skin crawl. More notes followed, each with similar messages like, "Can't wait to see how it ends." None of them were threatening, yet the anonymity of the sender, leaving notes at my door, started to disturb me deeply. Each little piece of paper felt like a silent whisper in the dark, making me wonder who was watching, waiting, and wanting something from me. One night, as I was finishing up some writing, a chilling sound pierced the silence. Someone was tampering with my door lock. My heart leaped to my throat as I froze, listening. "Who's there?" I called out sharply. The noise halted instantly, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying, suggesting that my call had startled someone away from my door. The thought that someone had tried to enter my room shook me deeply. Frantically, I picked up the phone and dialed the front desk, seeking some explanation or reassurance. The night clerk's voice wavered as he informed me that, disturbingly, there were no other guests checked into the rooms near mine. The implication hit me hard. The person trying to get into my room had to be someone from inside the motel, someone who knew the layout and had access to the keys. My hands trembling, I reached for my cell phone to call the police, only to find that it had no service, a not uncommon issue in such a remote location but frustratingly ill-timed. As I tried to think of what to do next, the sound of the door lock clicking sent a spike of fear through me. He was back, and this time, he had gotten in. I quickly retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I looked around for anything to use as a weapon. I grabbed a heavy shampoo bottle and a metal nail file, crude but necessary weapons if it came to defending myself. I stood behind the door, waiting for any sign of movement outside. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft, eerie creaks of the motel settling around me. I was terrified, but determined to protect myself at all costs. The door to the bathroom shuddered as the stalker threw his weight against it. I gripped the hairdryer tightly, my other hand holding the hot curling iron, ready to defend myself. As the door finally burst open, I felt a rush of adrenaline. The stalker lunged, but I swung the hairdryer hard, hitting him across the face. He staggered back, and I didn't hesitate to play to my advantage, pressing the hot curling iron against his arm as he tried to grab me. He howled in pain and stumbled, giving me just enough time to slip past him and out of the bathroom. I sprinted from my room to the front desk, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The night was quiet, eerily silent as I ran. Bursting into the lobby, I shouted for help. The motel owner, awakened by the commotion, quickly came to my aid. He immediately saw the panic in my eyes and the desperation in my voice and called the police without hesitation. The police arrived surprisingly swiftly, and I explained what had happened, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. They apprehended the stalker on the motel grounds, still reeling from the burns and the blow. It turned out he was a disgruntled former employee who had unresolved issues with the motel's management. He had been lurking around, fueled by a vendetta against the owner. The police took him away, and the relief that washed over me was palpable. The danger was over, the threat removed. I was safe, thanks to my quick thinking and the timely response of the motel owner and police. After everything that happened, I knew I couldn't stay at the motel any longer. I packed my things and headed home early the next morning, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind with every mile I put between myself and that place. Though shaken and still feeling the aftershocks of fear, I found within myself a new determination. As I drove, I thought about how I could use my terrifying experience as the foundation for my next novel. It would be a story of survival, of a woman's fight against a hidden danger, mirroring the ordeal I had just lived through. By the time I reached home, the outline of a new book was forming, each chapter fueled by the adrenaline and resolve that had kept me alive. This real-life horror had transformed into a driving force for my writing. The book that emerged became a bestseller, resonating with readers who found the terror of what could happen in such ordinary settings chillingly plausible. In sharing my story, I wanted to remind everyone that sometimes, the scariest tales are not those of ghosts or monsters, but those that could unfold in the quietest, most unexpected places. The scariest stories are sometimes the ones that can happen to anyone, anywhere.